It's been so long. I don't think that I don't think that I can predict anymore.
This is a little bit of filler content because I'm out on location today filming something really cool. And if you want to know what that cool thing is, be sure to subscribe for when that video drops later in the week.
But with this being a Formula 1 channel, I need to make some mid-season predictions. And even though I didn't do a mid-season report this year, I will be doing an end-of-season report. But for right now, I want to make some relatively wild-ish predictions for the rest of the year. Here are 10 for your delectation. Now, I think this one is quite obvious, so I will get this one out of the way. Max Verstappen will win the 2024 championship. Now, you might be shocked thinking that surely I would want Lando Norris to win the world title since I'm a McLaren fan. McLaren is my team. But let's be real here, because even though there's been a lot of discussion regarding the Red Bull and something to do with asymmetrical braking, and now the thing they came up with has been banned and removed, and that, by the way, is not cheating. It's like with DAS and Mercedes. It was an innovative thing that was cool, but has now been since outlawed, and it's now been removed. So, no, Red Bull were not cheating. They just came up with something really clever, and it was a little bit too clever for the FIA's liking. You know, they want to try and redress the balance. But for all of the work that Red Bull have done when the rules were followed, then it's quite obvious that Max Verstappen has done enough to secure the title, unless there is a run on reliability that concerns the likes of the Red Bull, and Max Verstappen falls behind. But even then, with 10 races to go, and if Lando Norris scores every single time a win and Max Verstappen is second, that's still only 70 points gained, and Lando is more than that behind. So Max needs to have a few Mardy races for that to even happen. So we need to have Lando go on a tremendous run of victories and second places, whereas Max Verstappen is struggling to even get into the top 5. Then we might be able to say game on. But I think right now it's looking a little bit unlikely. But hey, could be wrong, but it's one of the more obvious ones I wanted to say. And speaking of wins and Max Verstappen, given that there are 10 races left to go, I just seriously doubt that we're going to be having a run of victories that are akin to what we saw, like 5, 6, 7, up to 10 in a row. Yeah, Max Verstappen ain't going to win every single remaining race, that's quite obvious, but I think that for my second prediction, he will have no more than a 3-race run of victory. So, say if Max Verstappen does find his mojo again, and he does go back to winning races, I think he won't score more than 3 wins in a row. Doesn't necessarily mean he'll only score 3 wins in this half of the season. It just means he won't get more than a hat-trick, in my own opinion. But even then, that's still going to be getting closer to having 10 victories this year. And many people were reminding me that, hey, Max Verstappen was predicting that he might win 10 races in 2024, so you know what? That might not actually be that unreasonable. Maybe that might actually come true. Maybe he should start a career as a YouTuber.
But if you do that, Max, just be careful. Don't put F1 in your title.
Now, don't worry. I'm not going to be making predictions solely regarding Red Bull. My next prediction concerns the battle for 6th place in the Constructors. Even though I've actually talked about Aston Martin and VCAR battling it for 5th place in the Constructors, I feel like Aston Martin might have done enough to be able to stave off that competition, but it all really depends on where the upgrades are going to go. And for that, I think that the biggest rivals of VCAR for this year to take 6th place in the Constructors will be Haas. Now, you might be thinking that, oh, you're only saying that out of recency bias after the video that you made yesterday regarding Haas and how they've been able to turn it around. Well, yes, that's very true. But the fact is, though, in just these last few months, Haas have gone from being the worst team to being a really solid midfield team that is knocking on the door of teams such as VCARB and sometimes actually shames the likes of Aston Martin. And if Haas continue their upgrades and upgrade and update their car and their team in a very sensible manner, which is like, you know, a typical Formula 1 team, then we might be able to see a really good positive case of momentum, especially with Nico Hülkenberg, who's on an absolutely terrific run, which will completely come to the end next year when Sauber drags him back down to 17th place, like Haas was most of the time last year. But even then, we've realised that, hey, Nico is still really good. He's in his late 30s, of course, but he's not lost any speed at all. And if Kevin Magnussen is able to find a bit of mojo himself and end his F1 career on a high, I think he's run his course and I think he's perfectly okay with it. He's admitted that this second stint of Formula 1 has not gone the way that he hoped for. But what he might be able to do is try and find a way that he can score a few more points, get himself to the point where he doesn't end up with a race ban since he's very close on penalty points. That might be a personal victory in of itself. and we might see Haas pull an absolute blinder, considering especially that in terms of the word correlation that's become the buzzword this year in terms of F1 techno jargon that's suddenly become mainstream, Haas actually has a wind tunnel that produces better results in reality. I don't know how they did it, but they did it. And what's really, really weird is that Ferrari uses the same tools in Maranello, so the fact that Haas is getting one thing and Ferrari is getting another thing, I mean, wow, I think Ferrari needs to pilfer some people from Haas. That's my honest opinion. And now my honest opinion regards the likes of Lance Stroll. And you might be thinking, oh, you're going to be hating on him so much, aren't you? Well, it's something that I've noticed over the course of the year that's been his own little challenge. Do you recall during the Hungarian Grand Prix that team orders came into play? That Lance was let through by Fernando to chase after Yuki Tsunoda, couldn't do it, then was asked to give the place back, but no, he didn't. There's been a little running narrative regarding Lance Stroll's position in the championship, and my prediction is that whatever he's doing will not be enough to secure 10th place in the championship, because right now, both Aston Martin drivers are propping up the top 10, which is, in a way, where they should be. So Lance being 10th is not exactly underachieving. This is pretty much what he is meant to do. Aston Martin are the 5th fastest team at the moment. It could change in the second half of the season, depending on what they might want to do for 2025 and going forward. And then they might even want to just sacrifice 2025 and focus on the following year, like most teams might do. We don't know. The development war next year is going to be very interesting. But I do think that Lance Stroll is very much aware about what's going on with 10th place, because Hülkenberg and Tsunoda are within a couple of points of Lance, and Lance does have his good days, of course, but he does also have his fair share of pretty bad days where he cannot broach the top 10, let alone get in within a chance of Q3, most likely dropping out of the bottom of Q2, sometimes even Q1 now. And Aston Martin's fall has not been nearly as bad as it was last year in terms of comparison to where they were at the start of the year. I think the Canadian driver is going to have a little bit of a challenge, and we might see a few more team order hijinks come into play, where he might snatch a cheeky point or two from Fernando Alonso, because Fernando, he ain't going to be losing P9, unless Yuki, Nico, Lance have a tremendously huge run. But then again, this being Aston Martin, you can't take anything out of the equation when it comes to Lance and performance. Now, this next one may not be all that exciting, but my next prediction surrounds Alpine, and I believe that before the end of the year, we will find out news regarding a brand new outside investor who will be seeking to splash the cash alongside Ryan Reynolds' efforts and Maximum Effort, as well as a random bunch of boxers and golfers, in terms of bringing more money and attention to the likes of Alpine. Celebrity attention. But don't be fooled. All of this will be smoke and mirrors in regards to the likes of Renault Group reducing their stake in the team. Currently, they have about, I think, 76%-ish in terms of a controlling stake of the team. But I think that could be whittled down to maybe 70%, 65%, just gaining some tens of millions of dollars more in terms of extra investment or money and profit, since, you know, they want to try and extend the value of the team. They might want to just skim some more off the top, because I'm pretty sure that their initial investment when they bought back the team in 2016 has well and truly come good. And then by the time you get to 2026, if they do well, or if they don't do quite enough, but they've been able to do enough to actually increase the value of the team or justify a $1.4 billion price tag, then we'll see Renault selling its remaining stake or just retaining a tiny minority sliver, like maybe 5-10% or something. Just so that means they can have an in case they want to buy it back, which they might do in a few years' time. We don't know. That's exactly what they did with Enston when they sold it to the Lotus Group, and then Proton and all that stuff. That just got really messy. But don't be surprised if we hear more about other investors outside of Maximum Effort and Alpine and all that stuff. Flavio Briatore is there for a reason. He is there to try and find buyers for that team. So do not be surprised if we get some really interesting, and by interesting I mean incredibly odd, investors or companies or a brand new title sponsor. I personally think that BWT won't be sticking around with that team for much longer, and instead, you never know, you might get BWT going to Haas. Wow, white, red and pink. Ooh, That could be really nice. Oh, just imagine that. BWT MoneyGram Haas F1 team. It's a bit of a word salad, but I'm pretty sure that BWT will pay a lot of money to pay Gunther's old cars in pink. But then again, I think Io Komatsu and Jean are tickled pink with the current results of Haas.
Yes, I know you think it's corny, but by now, if you subscribe to me, you know what I'm all about.
Now this next one surrounds the likes of Norris and Piastri. No, I'm not going to say who finishes ahead of whom. That is far too early to say, and I know that a lot of you out there will be accusing me of bias toward my boy. But instead, I want to talk about points spread, the difference between points, whether it be Piastri ahead or Norris ahead. I believe that the gap between the two drivers come the end of the season will be within 10 points. It's going to be really, really close. And if you still want to ask me regarding who's going to finish ahead, no, I'm not going to do that.
Because I already know a fair few of you are sick and tired of me glazing over Oscar Piastri, and equally, a lot of people are sick and tired about me doubting the likes of Lando. And yes, I might be gushing about Oscar a little bit, but I'm just glad that people are starting to recognise his ability now. I was here talking about it at the beginning of last year, but were people paying attention to me and other like-minded people? No! People were talking about tyre management. Well, manage this! Oscar is a really nice young man.
But I think it is factually accurate that Piastri has been able to take points out of Norris rather than Norris taking points out of Verstappen, but I'll just leave you with that. Then we talk about the likes of Lewis Hamilton. Regarding Lewis, I don't think he's done in terms of getting victories. Right now, he is fired up, and whether or not you're saying he deserved the race at the Belgian Grand Prix, he was absolutely electric. And it just goes to show that in terms of trying to draft another car, we've gone back to where we were in 2020, where you can't do that, where we had ground effect, where it's supposed to avoid the situation, and now we've got the situation anyway, but I think it's even worse. The overtake numbers are atrocious. Even though Lewis Hamilton has said that he does not gel well with this iteration of Formula 1 car, I still think that he's got a couple of more wins left in the tank. I'm predicting that he will win another 2 races this season. Where exactly, I'm not entirely sure, but I do feel like Austin is a fairly decent shout, considering he won the first one, and he does have a nice affinity with the track, and last year, had it not been for the plank issue, he might have actually been odds-on to get close to beating Max Verstappen. It was really, really close in a season where the W14 was a bit of a non-starter. He's motivated, and Mercedes also want to give him a car where he can actually do well before he then goes off to Ferrari. And yeah, George Russell might have a time of it. He might have some things to say about that as well. But I again think that Lewis has still got some magic in him. Now, speaking of Lewis's team, Mercedes, I reckon, could be contenders by the end of the year for the constructors, as long as they're able to maintain the upgrades and actually be able to improve on their car really consistently. Now, I'm not discounting McLaren entirely, unless they really drop the ball when it comes to actually scoring points in their strategy. And who knows regarding Ferrari, they're bringing a major upgrade package for the Dutch Grand Prix, and that might bring them back into contention again, and this prediction could easily go wrong. But I still want to try and take a cheeky punt and say Mercedes might be back on it. Their motivation is higher than ever. They managed to get around the days of the cost cap where they could spend $400 million on upgrades just willy-nilly. That's more money for Toto's pumpernickel fund. But now, I just think Mercedes have finally cracked it. They've now got a solution which is working. The car is now headed toward them in terms of being able to get on top of it. It's far less on the edge, and they actually are bringing upgrades that work. And when they don't work as well as intended, they're more than happy to admit it and then roll it back, and they do well anyway. I'm pretty sure that the upgrades that we saw at Spa will be complemented by other upgrades as well. We'll have a much more understood W15 than we did about a month ago. I think it's going to be really curious, so we might see Mercedes maybe beat Ferrari just in terms of consistency, and maybe get a little bit closer to Red Bull as well. They're going to be contenders. I'm not saying they're going to win, but I'm sure that they might get well within the 100-ish point spread. Now, this might seem a little bit mad of me, but I think that Sauber might end up scoring a point, because surely by the end of the year, they'll have scored at least one singular point, even if it's an 11th and somebody gets a penalty and somebody gets promoted to 10th. I will be absolutely flabbergasted if Valtteri Bottas ends a year with 0 points. It's absolutely crazy. In my own honest opinion, I feel like Sauber by now should have at least 4, maybe 5 points in the bank, considering that at the beginning of the year they weren't terrible. They had a couple of 11th place finishes, and at the Chinese Grand Prix, Bottas might have been able to contest for 9th place had his engine not given out on him. And we all know about the pit stop maladies and the fast and all that stuff. They have now fixed it, and some of their pit stops are now kind of quick and pacey. But that's still too little too late, because the upgrades they're bringing just don't work. Zhou Guanyu is permanently locked to 20th place, it seems. Logan is actually getting into Q2 far more often than Zhou, and as we all remember, he's actually outqualified Checo a few more times this year. People downing on Logan, it's getting a little bit silly right now, but we're not talking about Sargent right now, we're talking about Sauber. I do feel like it will be Valtteri Bottas who gets that singular point, just because he has shown moments where he can be in the points just out of nowhere. And surely a 10th place finish, by the time we get to near the end of the year where engine reliability is going to get a little bit dicey and hairy, surely they might be able to secure something through sheer attrition alone. But if they end up pointless, then wow. Then we talk about Kimi Antonelli. And I know that you probably don't want me to talk about Kimi Antonelli, but I think that we will be seeing him in a free practice 1 session this year, because pretty soon he will be turning 18, which makes me then completely baffled as to why they went through the special dispensation courts to get this for Kimi Antonelli when he was 17, when they didn't do anything with him, and now he's 18. What was the point of any of that, other than maybe to set a trend for the future? Should another future star come in when they're 17, they're really, really good, and then they can just put them in the car if they just go to the FIA, please let them in, they're so good. But the rumours are saying that Kimi will be announced as the teammate of George Russell at the Italian Grand Prix, and I wouldn't be surprised if we see Kimi in a Mercedes during FP1, either to compare against Lewis, the departing driver, or to compare him with George Russell, the person he's going to be working together with next year. We shall see. I think it'll be very interesting come the Italian Grand Prix of what they do with Antonelli if that ends up coming true. And then my last prediction, I predict that Sergio Perez might not do enough when it comes to retaining his seat, and he might be out of the picture come the Mexican Grand Prix. Well, now remember I said after, because I think if they did it before, let's just say that the Red Bull team might find it really hard getting to the paddock, because we've just found out that Sergio Perez is having to give way to a brand new race engineer, given that Hugh Bird, his existing race engineer, is going on paternity leave. Now, congratulations to Hugh Bird and his partner. Fair enough. That's what it is. I remember my paternity leave that Google blessed me with, which was just a few days in a way where I sort of lightly worked, but that's beside the point. But the point is, though, is that Sergio Perez needs as much help as he can get, and he needs a constant, the one voice that he hears all the time. And this new guy, it might work out great. We might see a complete change in Checo, and if that's the case, then fantastic. But if we don't, and we get a situation which Valtteri Bottas had, I know I'm talking about Bottas a lot in this video, but it's just true though, he brings up a lot of examples this year. He had a brand new engineer without being told, and then Miami was a complete and utter joke, where he almost crashed into Piastri because his race engineer didn't tell him that he was there. Yeah, talk about a baptism of fire, right? Richard Wood, I believe that's his name, has been knocking around Red Bull for over a decade or so. I'm pretty sure this has been talked about for a few weeks now that this was going to happen, but still, it's a really intimate job, and you really need to know the guy inside and out and trust them completely. And there are talks that he might be using older spec RB20 parts to try and figure out the problem, back when the RB20 was a lot more domineering, and Sergio Perez liked it more and he was able to do more and he got those podiums. It might work out for him, it might not. It might be just a case of all of the other cars have developed and Red Bull going backwards. It might either just see meeting them in the middle, or it just might end up with them just being woefully behind, but Checo just likes it more. I don't know, but I just feel like there's this little doubt that after the Mexican Grand Prix, if we don't see Sergio come out with consistent podiums, or better yet, winning the Azerbaijan Grand Prix, and if he can do well at his own home track, that might be the stay of execution for the last 4 races. After that, it might be a little bit dodgy, and we might see some of the younger boys in the Red Bull camp get a chance, especially since I've seen Yuki Tsunoda being bigged up a little more by Daniel Ricciardo, and the team is a little bit more receptive to even the notion of him being promoted. You can find out a little bit more about why I think the Red Bull boys are coming in this video here that you can go and watch right now. And yeah, it's just going to get a little bit more complicated for the boys at Milton Keynes.